Okay, welcome back. This is video number 9 in the Unit 2 series, and we're going to shift gears today and we're going to start talking about migration rather than population. If you remember in the David Palmer book, chapters 3 and 4 are about population. Chapter 5 is about migration or the movement of people, long-term relocation. So when we think about where and why there, remember that that is pretty much the whole subject of human geography is about patterns and processes. So where are people moving from or where are they moving to? And then why are they moving to or from those locations or to and from those destinations? And of course, you know that all of the answers to those questions will be basically economic, social, cultural, political, and environmental factors. So everything about migration is uniquely spatial. So how do migrants choose their new home? There's a really cool story if you've ever heard about ketchup, salsa, and sriracha. Three distinct sauces, all of them very popular in America today. And most people don't realize all three came to America because of migration. So if you want to go out there and find it, the story of ketchup and salsa and sriracha. So what should we know about migration? We should know that Americans are the most mobile people in the world today. Every single year, statistically in our country, 5 million Americans will move from one state in the 50 states to another. However, about 7 times as many Americans will make a move and stay within their state. So like Miami to Orlando. So really, when we think about Tobler, the first law of geography, everything's related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. What we need to remember is that this is true with migration. Many, many more people will make a short move than the number of people who will make a longer distance move. Statistically, the average American moves about once every 6 years. You can think about in your life, that means that your family has probably moved at least once, maybe even twice. Some of your families may have moved a lot more. There is the rare student, like a Katie Turner, who has been born and has lived their entire life in the same house. Because the Turners, we've moved several times before Katie was born, but since Katie's been born, we're in the same location. And why would you leave Spanish River? So if you think about why some states are gaining population and why other states are losing population, again, think about those economic, social, cultural, political, and environmental factors. This schematic diagram basically shows you the idea that most Americans like the kind of place that they live. So even if they move to a different location, they tend to stay in the same type of an area. So if they live in a suburb, they generally move to another suburb. If they live in an urban area, they move to another big city. If they live in a rural area, they move to another place out in the country. You can see that very few Americans are making the jump from urban to rural or vice versa. Very few Americans are making the move from the suburbs to the country or from the farms to the suburbs. A little bit more will move urban to suburban or suburban back to urban. Now, this one is age specific particularly. A lot of young couples will move to the suburbs as they start to have kids because they perceive that the suburbs are a better place to raise children, and there's certainly more space and more bang for your buck in terms of your housing dollar. And then I think sometimes the retirees, the empty nesters, they leave the suburbs and they come back to the cities to be closer to the big hospitals and closer to doctors' offices that surround those big hospitals instead of being way far out in the suburbs, especially as they get to the point where they give up driving and everything in the suburb is so far to everything else. And as elderly people get a little older, sometimes they move back to urban places. This one is that net domestic migration. Remember, the word domestic means at home. So we're not talking about people coming into the United States. We're talking about Americans moving around within the United States. And if it's a red state, that means that they are losing population. If it's a blue state, it means that they're gaining population. And again, we should look for trends here. You know that a lot of Americans are moving out of the north and the northeast and moving south and west. And you can certainly see that trend here. States where there's high standard of living, like New York, Chicago, and Illinois, even in California, are places that many people are leaving from. States that are perceived to be cheaper and better values. South Carolina is one of the most popular states right now for people to move into. Believe it or not, for retirees, Florida is still number one. Arizona is a fraction of Florida, and South Carolina, even though it is number 3, it's a fraction of Arizona, but it is the third most popular place for retirees now in this country, is South Carolina. So you can see that most of the Rust Belt, these states up here in the industrial Northeast, Northeast, yeah, a lot of negatives moving out of those areas as the economy suffers. California, we think it's a beautiful place to live, but you know, there are a lot of wildfires in California, a lot of dry issues, water drought, and so it's been tough in California. But look at the states around California, a lot of in-migration to some of these places as well. So that map that you just saw kind of goes along with this one a little bit in the sense that this is what we mean by were you born in the state of your residence. And you look at Florida. We know that Florida is full of people who are not Floridians. It's not very common to find people in Florida that were born in Florida. I think the younger you are, the more likely it is. But amongst the people older than me, for example, almost everybody is from somewhere else. And that's the joke. The further south in Florida you go, the more north you get, because these people are from Philadelphia, they're from New York, they're from Boston, and they migrate down that I-95 corridor and come into the state of Florida. Same thing with Arizona. It's a big retirement destination, and so you see that the states of the Northeast and the Midwest, these are states where a lot of people were born there, but the states of the South and the West are places where people migrate to. So what do we know about some vocabulary words here? When studying mobility, we classify movement based on the period of time that's involved. If it's cyclic, that means that it's going to be a repetitive cycle, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So this will be like your activity space, which we've already talked about this school year. Your parents may commute back and forth from the home to work. Seasonal movement will also be cyclical. This is like the snowbirds that come to Florida every winter, but they go back home for the summer. And then it also could be our nomadic behaviors, like what we saw in Mongolia in the video where the lady was living with the nomadic families. They follow a pattern. It's not some aimless wandering around. It is a cyclical movement pattern. So here are some of the more common cyclical patterns that Americans typically have. You would be that top left one, almost every day, coming back and forth between home and school. That's going to be about 8% of your life. It seems like forever to be in school, but believe it or not, you're going to spend a lot more time commuting back and forth from home to work, and you'll even do more shopping and recreational activities over the course of your life than you will school. You think it's hard work now. Trust me, you have no idea how hard it's going to be later in life. So periodic movement, this is a bit different in the sense that there is still a back and forth movement, but you have less cycles involved in here. So there's a period of time where you're going to stay in that new location. So this could be like when you go away to school. It doesn't mean that you don't come back home, but there's not a frequency or a cycle of the back home movement. You go away, you might come home once or twice in a semester, but the next semester you might come home 3 or 4 times. So in other words, it's not a cycle, it's a periodic movement. This could be military service where you do a 2-year obligation to serve overseas. It could be like going to do, Doctors Without Borders program where you spend 6 months working in a developing world country to, solve some infectious disease. So that's what we see when we see periodic movement. Migrant workers in the United States can sometimes be an example of this periodic movement as well, where they come into the U.S. to make enough money, they send some money back home, but usually they only stay in the U.S. long enough to make enough money, and then they go back. So it is still away from and a back from movement, but it is not in a cycle pattern. By the way, that big vocab word, remittances, that you see there in the bottom, that is the big word for when you send money back home. And there are a lot of countries in the world where remittances make up a significant portion of family incomes. So I wanted to show you some statistics about this. These are the biggest remittance sending countries in the world. Look at the United States. Every year, about $47 billion leaves the United States and goes back to places like Mexico, countries in Central America, Haiti, even in South America. Germany's a big remittance sender, mostly to Turkey, Saudi Arabia, because so many guest workers in the oil industry. A lot of that money goes back to India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Indonesia. Switzerland gets a lot of guest workers that are coming in from other parts of Europe, and really in the banking system all over the world. Russia also has a lot of people who were, say, from the Ukraine, or people from Poland, or people from, Lithuania, and they work in Russia and they send money back home. This map is kind of the opposite of the last chart in the sense that these are the receivers These are the countries that receive the remittance money. And as you can see, all of those senders that we just had before, the U.S. and Germany and Russia and Saudi Arabia, all of those countries are very low here. They don't really get any of this remittance money. They are the source of the money, not the destination of the money. So you'll see countries like Haiti, Mexico, India, Pakistan. These are places that are receiving that remittance money that's being sent home by the workers who have moved to a different part of the world. Okay, this little segment was kind of short and sweet, about 10 minutes or so. If you have any questions, please send me a text through the Remind system, or certainly come into class and we'll see what we can do to help you out. Thanks.